May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Sonny Abel Benjamin Alexander Hawks, and I would like to serve forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services. Have your attention, please. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Sonny Yahweh Hawkins. I'd like to serve forever as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and an honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yahshua Abelin in the sanctuary.
Now, if y'all remain standing, we'll turn over to the first speaker, Sonny Yisrael, Deacon Yedidiah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. What I want to be talking about today is, unless Satan and her followers can destroy the earth and the heavens, Yahweh's laws will guide the universe to peace. Unless Satan and her followers can destroy the earth and the heavens, Yahweh's laws will guide the universe to peace. And I want to read an astonishing statement that Yahshua made in Matthew 5:17, and that's on page 731, Matthew 5:17 through 20. And it says, "Do not even think that I have come to destroy the laws or the prophets. I have not come to destroy them, but to establish them. For truly I say to you, unless heaven and earth pass away, one yod, the smallest of the letters, will in no way pass from the law, until all things are perfected. Whosoever therefore will break one of the least of these laws, and will teach man so, he will be called the least in the kingdom of Yahweh. But whosoever will do the teachings, whosoever will do and teach them, the same will be called great in the kingdom of Yahweh. For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of Yahweh." And if you really think about that, Yahshua was speaking of two things in this statement. And if you want to write this down, the first one, he was assuring that the laws of Yahweh would be the number one thing that will perfect the earth, or that will perfect the world and the universe. The laws of Yahweh will perfect the world and the universe. And the second thing that the second thing in this statement is he showed the schemes of the adversary. All right, and that scheme is to try to persuade mankind to destroy the earth and the heavens that Yahweh created. And that involves the earth and mankind. But that word earth and the real cause of global warming, and I advise everybody who doesn't have this book to get this book. It gives the definition of that word earth, or the meaning of that word earth. I think it's on page 150. No, not 150. Page 105. Page 105, and it says, notice verse 4 again. Isaiah 24, verse 4. It says, the earth mourns and fades away. The world mourns and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. It says the word translated earth means earth, but it also means everything on and in the earth. Then it says in the King James Version, in Genesis, the phrase everything that creepeth upon the earth is written. However, the Hebrew meaning is all the things with which the earth creeps. This takes into account what science calls microorganisms, microscopic animals, plants, bacteria, viruses, etc. And the prophecies, we have to remember that the prophecies stand sure. And Yahshua Messiah assures us that we can trust the prophecies of Yahweh and the instructions of salvation. And we get these instructions for salvation from the one that Yahweh sent to teach us in these last days. And in the scriptures it calls him the disputer of this age. But I want to read you something in Luke 24:25. It's on page 813. Luke 24:25. And it says, "Then he said to them, O fools and slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets have spoken." And these instructions for salvation is what comes out of the mouthpiece of Yahweh, what comes out of the mouth of Yisrael Hawkins. And it's our duty to obey and practice everything that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. And if we don't obey and practice everything that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh, it tells us here, O fools and slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Jeremiah 23, verse 5 through 8. Verse 5 through 8, and it's also on page 591. It says, "Behold, the day comes, says Yahweh," and this is Jeremiah 23, verse 5 through 8. It says, "Behold, the day comes, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch, and a king will reign and succeed, and will execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days, those who reverence Yahweh will be saved, and the called out ones will dwell safely." Right? And the called out ones will dwell safely. "And this is the name that he will proclaim to them at Abel, Yahweh Sitkanu, Yahweh our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the day comes, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, As surely as Yahweh live, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but they will say, As surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel into the protected place at Abel, and from all countries where they had been driven, and they will dwell in their own land." Yahweh shows where his protected place is, where his house is, and he also tells us to seek that place. But he shows us where his protected place is, where his house is, and what it will bring to the heavens and to the earth in this generation and forever. We have to remember that the world is heavily laden with sin in these last days, and it's our duty to help and turn this world around. And the only way we can do that is to believe every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh, out of the one sent. In Micaiah 4:1 through 3, Micaiah 4, verse 1 through 3, it says, "But in the last days it will come to pass that the mountain promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations. It will be raised above all congregations, and all people will eventually flow to it. And many people will go and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain uplifting of Yahweh, and to the house of Yahweh, or into the house of the father of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, because the laws will depart from Zion, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And he will judge between many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore." So remember, unless Satan and her followers can destroy the heavens and the earth, Yahweh's laws will guide the universe to peace. And Yahweh's laws will guide the universe to peace. Because as we know, the gates of hell will not prevail against the house of Yahweh. And with that, if y'all please stand. I'd like to turn it over to the Great Kohan Benjamin Krause.
Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you, and may be seated. Okay, if you could please turn your books of Yahweh over to Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. May the peace of Yahweh be with everybody here today and abroad. So everyone heard the news this week about President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and all the things that stirred up. It's stirring up at this time. I do want to remind you before I get into this other portion of the sermon, what was brought last year about 1976 in this book, The Mark of the Beast. The gematria actually of 1976. The first number, I'm not going to go through all of them, I'm only going to show you, and that was the year 1976, 2762. It's the word, it means a net, and it's from 2760, and it means to set in motion, to start, to move, or be agitated. Okay, and I mentioned then that I remembered that the word trump or trumpet meant the same thing. In Greek, 4536 is this word trump or trumpet, the sound of a trumpet. Now remember, there's two trumpets right now, okay? There's two trumps at this time, two trumpets. One of them's right here at the House of Yahweh, the great witness Israel Hawkins. And right here, it means through the idea of reverberation. It means a trumpet. It's from this word here. Keep that word reverberate in your mind. And it's from 4537, and it means a sound, to sound a trumpet. Trumpet will sound. And it's from this Greek word here. And it means agitation. The swell of the sea. Remember the roaring and surging of the sea in Luke 21:25? What's taking place around the world right now after this announcement? You know, the sea is the multitudes, nations, remember? And they're all swelled up and agitated right now because of an announcement by President Trump. And it's from this Greek word here, which means to disturb, and it means to beguile. Also means to flatter. And it means to agitate, and it means to disturb or trouble. You know, something else occurred in 1976, the rise of Donald Trump, as told in the pages of the New York Times. Can you back out on that a little bit? There you go, okay? If you'll notice, the very first standalone profile of Donald Trump came in 1976 in the New York Times. And also it was mentioned that, can you back up just a little bit more? That President Trump, before he moved to D.C., and actually to this day, he has a penthouse on the 66th floor of the Trump Tower. It's a private floor, of course. $100 million floor. And every single, they noted in here, that everything on the 66th floor is dedicated to the sun god Apollo. Notice the statues of Eros, the gods, all the Greek gods. On the ceiling, you can't see it very well here, but it'll show you up here on the ceiling, Apollo in his chariots. the chariots of the sun god Apollo, or Baal. You can read this online. You can go and see for yourself. It's very interesting stuff. And it's going to tie right into, by the way, when President Trump made this announcement, you can watch this on C-SPAN if you just check for yourself, check me out. He began his speech at 1:07 Eastern, exactly. 10:07, Revelation 10:07. Remember the last trump. The trumpet, the sounding of the trumpet. And remember there's 2 trumpets. So you should be in the book of Acts, right? Acts chapter 7. Let's learn a little bit about this Israel here today. The Israel of God. Not the Israel of Yahweh, but the Israel of God. Acts chapter 7, we're going to look at verse 42. Then Yahweh turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, just as it is written in the book of the prophets. Was it to me you brought sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? No, but you have lifted up the idolatrous temple of Moloch, your god, and Kayun, your star god, Saturn, the star of your god, which you made for yourselves, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. I want you to remember on page 93 through 103 in the book, The Mark of the Beast. You need to go back and read that. It talks about a hidden God, the hidden one. And notice here, the hidden one, 666. Write these down, okay? These gods are Egyptian gods, Coptic gods. 666. I want to show you a picture of the star they lift up in Israel. Right here. On their flag. It's called the Star of David, but don't get that mixed up with King David. It has nothing to do with King David. They also call it the Seal of Solomon. Now, if you remember, Yahweh gave them up to worship the host of heaven. It's called the Seal of Solomon. That word Solomon, by the way, his name wasn't Solomon. It was Shalomo. Shalomo. Solomon is 2 words put together, sun and moon. And if you'll notice, sun and moon together is 666. They worship the host of heaven. Here's the flag of Israel. 666. It's a 6-sided flag, okay? There's some other 6-sided flags you need to know about. Here's one right here. It's on every ambulance in the United States of America. Complete with the serpent, and it's called the Star of Life. It's a six-pointed star. That's why it's called the Star of Life. You can see it on all the ambulances. Well, this ought to tell you something. Star of Life, 666. You know, Israel, I always used to tell the young prophets in the school that Israel, the name Israel, I-S-R-A-E-L, is simply Isis, Ra, and El. So here you go. Isis, Ra, and El, 666. Remember, it's a hidden God. It's actually the God of Israel. Don't get Israel confused with this Israel, okay? All this is showing you is what the other Israel is all about. They didn't worship Yahweh. They worshiped the hidden God. They worshiped Saturn and all the host of heaven. If you remember, Saturn, I showed last year, I believe, it was brought out that there is a hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn. You see that? You can look in Wikipedia yourself. It's called the hexagon of Saturn, Saturn's hexagon. You know, the hexagon, I want to show you. Hexagon, the word hex. I'm sure you've heard this word before. The witches use it. They put these on people. It's called a hex. A hex, it means to bewitch or practice witchcraft on. It means a spell or a charm. Remember those words associated with the 10 kings and Pope Francis, the Vatican? But it also means this. Hex means 6. 6. Okay? It's the Greek word for 6. So if you put in to your gematria calculator, hex, 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 here's what you'll get. 6, 6, 6. This is all just a coincidence, right, House of Yahweh? Speaking of the North Pole, I wonder who lives on the North Pole. Didn't this guy live there? Must be a coincidence. Now, I also want you to remember, if you look in Acts 7:43, by the way, this was a very rebellious and stubborn nation here. If you'll look at verse 51, the great deacon Stephen told these men, these Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, you stiff-necked, stubborn. Stubborn. That word stubborn was 666. You learned that in the last class. Okay? You're stubborn, he says. They didn't worship Yahweh. They resisted Spirit Holy. They opposed Yahweh. They didn't worship Yahweh. And notice, they worshiped their star god Saturn. Here you go. Saturn, Satan, 743. Isn't that Acts 7:43? I'll get into more of that later, that 888, which means don't get it mixed up with the 888 you call in to get your confession done. It means evil, wicked, immoral. We'll learn more about that later when there's more time. Now, turn over to Hosea, turn over to Hosea chapter... Oh, I can't do that. Hold on. Before we go there, let's get back to this because the camera wasn't working. Okay. Here's the gematria of Acts 7:43. We take out all the words that are added there. One of the numbers you're going to get is 1189. 11. Oh, by the way, I didn't show you Moloch and Kayun. He mentioned in 7:43. Notice that? Put them together. What do you get? 666. Interesting. But let's go to 1189 because 1189, it means Baal of winter. The Lord of the North. Lord of the North or Lord of winter. Well, who lives on the North Pole and comes around in the Christmas time? Interesting, right? Now, go to Hosea chapter 2. I got to get this in. Go to Hosea 2. You know, I'd like to stop that clock, at times. I love the clock, but I'd like to stop it. Okay, let's look at Hosea chapter 2. And I want you to go this week, if you can, go back and read who is Lord God, who is Baal in this, in the booklet that Pastor put out. Because he mentions this at the very last of the book. Look at Hosea 2, verse 17. Yahweh says, let's look at 16. And it will be in that day, says Yahweh, that you will call me Ishi, and will no longer call me Baali, my Lord. For I will take away the names of Balaam, the lords, the gods, and the goddesses out of her mouth, and their names will no longer be called upon. I want you to think of 2/17 as 2017 this year, right? Didn't Pastor say he's making a calendar, getting rid of all the gods? You think that's a coincidence? Watch this. Names of Balaam. 666. Let's get them out of our mouth, House of Yahweh. 666 is the number of the beast. Has no business here, right? Isn't our great pastor the most inspired man on the face of the earth? Oh, by the way, one more thing. Here's Baal Zephon, 199. Here he is, complete with his. I got to show you this picture. I know I gotta run, but I got to show you this last picture because here you go, Baal Zephon, complete with the 6-sided star right there on his chest. Okay, so that's all the time I got. If you'd all please stand. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I'd like to turn it over now to the Great Kohan Yahodah Hawkins.
We got a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so please turn to page 696 in the Book of Yahweh. This is Amos 3, verses 13 through 15. I'm going to have to move rather rapidly, so hang in there. You can get the DVD or the film or however the audio-visual guys are going to do it. This goes, hear this, and testify against the house of Jacob, says Father Yahweh, the mighty one of hosts, that in the day I punish the transgressions of Israel upon him, I will also visit and destroy the altars of Bethel. The horns of the altar will be cut off and fall to the ground. I will tear down the winter house and the summer house, and the houses of ivory will perish. The great houses will come out to an end, says Yahweh. Okay, here we go. The prepositional phrase against the house that is written in Amos 3:13 is translated from the Hebrew compound word babayit, which is composed of the Hebrew preposition ba and the Hebrew word bait. The Hebrew preposition ba is listed on page 56 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon, but Benjamin Davidson shows this word means for, on account of. A Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, pages 198, 205 and 384 show the Hebrew word bait means house of Yahweh and Abel. The word Yaakov that is written in Amos 3:13 through 15, well actually it's 3:13, is translated from the Hebrew word Yaakov. This word is listed on page 587 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, and hear this, which shows this word means Yahshua Yisrayl, the one born after. The word visit that is written in Amos 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word fakad. This word is listed on pages 1145 and 1146 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, which shows this word means to divide, to split asunder for judgment, to be given over to. The word Bethel that is written in Amos 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew and Canaanite mongrel compound word Bethel. This word is listed on page 197 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon of the Old Testament to the Old Testament by Julius First. So this word means an actual habitation of men or gods. The words altar and altars that are written in Amos 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word mazavak. This word is listed on page 790 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, who shows this word means God, idolatry, God worship. The word horns that is written in Amos 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word karanut. This word is listed on page 1144 of volume 3 of the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon by Koehler and Baumgartner, which shows this word means gods. The word winter that is written in Amos 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word haraft. That's haraf. This word is listed on page 493 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, which shows this word means to destroy. The word house and houses that are written in Moshe 3:15 are translated from the Hebrew word bayit. These words are listed on page 197 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, which shows this word means an actual habitation of men or gods. Next page. The word summer that is written in Moshe 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word katz. This word is listed on page 1248 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, which shows this word means the end of days, the last historical development, the appointed limit to go to the end. The word ivory that is written in Moshe 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word shan. This word is listed on page 1420 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament of Julius First, which along with Psalm 140 verse 3 and Revelation 12:10 on page 979. Go to that page next. Letting Scripture interpret Scripture shows this word means to accuse, accuser, the accuser of the brethren. The word perish that is written in Amos 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word safu. This word is listed on page 730 of Gesenius Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon by Edward Robinson, which shows this word means to fall. So this is what Amos 3:13-15 is saying. Hear this and testify for the house of Yahweh at Abel, O Jacob and Yisrael, who were born, Yisrael, the one who was born after you, says Father Yahweh. In other words, Jacob and Yisrael was born after him. My judgment will be that in that day Israel will be given over to their sin. My judgment will be that they will be given over to the worship of their God in the house of their God. But the gods, the Elohim that they worship and serve, will be cut off and fall to the ground, including the accuser. The houses of the gods will be torn down at the time of the end, for the houses of the gods and the accuser of the brethren will fall. The accuser of the brethren will fall. The great houses of the gods, the Elohim, will come to an end, says Yahweh. The houses of the gods. What house of gods? St. Anthony, St. Jane, St. Peter, St. Paul. Who has all those gods? The Vatican. But I want you to remember, it said the accuser will fall. There is a scripture that testifies to this. Turn to page 979. This is Revelation 12:10. The Apostle Shaul quoted Moshe quite a bit, like Revelation 10:7. The great secret, the great work. He does it again. Remember, Moshe said the accuser of the brethren will fall. Revelation 12:10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our Father and the power of his Messiah. For the accuser of the brethren is cast down, just like Moshe said, who accused them before the Father day and night. This is what it's all about. The point is, Moshe talked about two witnesses. Moshe talked about two people named Jacob and Israel. And Moshe talked about the fall of the accuser of the brethren. That's why often Yahshua, the Apostle Shaul, and the Apostle Yochanan said, for it is written by the prophet Moshe that the accuser of the brethren would be cast down in Revelation 12:10 on page 979. The accuser and everyone following him will fall. The houses of the gods will fall. There will be no St. Peter, no St. John, no St. whoever, Luke, Matthew, all of them, that they can't even get the names right. May Yahweh bless your understanding I now turn the service over to the Great Kohan Ilya Hawkins. I got it.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated.
I got it.
Of course, many things taking place in today's news, and of course, only in the house of Yahweh have you heard these things come to pass before they come to pass. You actually heard it from the one sent. But I want to show very quickly, of course, this other person. If we can zoom that in. The adversary who leads. I want to show you, he's talking about how, of course, Francis, if we can zoom that back out a little bit, Francis wants to tweak the English wording of the Lord's Prayer. Now, a very interesting point, keep in mind, that is Matthew chapter 6 and verse 13. So you're looking at 6:13 for one. And then I think the most honest statement he could ever give, he says that it should be something like, do not let us fall into temptation. He's more than welcome to take the Book of Yahweh version. It's much better. It reads very clearly. And he said it's Satan who leads us in temptation. That's his department. His department. Right? He leads you in temptation. Satan's tools. But remember, in the Book of Yahweh it says, and do not allow us to be led in temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Or from that divine serpent that sits on the 7 hills and all of those things that tie within that. Well, with all of those things taking place and the confusion that we see in society, this last week we had a senator from Minnesota, Al Franken, of course, he went before the Senate and he resigned this week due to some charges that were brought against him, things that he is accused of doing. Now, in watching his resignation speech, of course, he addresses that he's very much aware. Of course, he says he didn't do some of the things. And keep in mind, is he guilty of what he did if he only did what the system trained him to do? Think about that. If he only did what the system trained him to do, how guilty is he if he hasn't been taught the law of Yahweh yet? Because judgment starts at the house of Yahweh. But in his speech, he said he's very well aware of that what he is resigning for, there's someone who sits in the Oval Office who was on tape, showed that he did this, and there's a man running for senator in Alabama who's being accused of it. Now that man in Alabama stands against sodomy and other things. So there's a lot of confusion going on here where this man needs to resign, this man can be okay, but we're going to bash this man too. So you see the mass confusion. This is supposed to be leadership. These are the ones that's supposed to be an example for us to build a country, to set things straight. And then you have North Korea saying that war with the United States is inevitable. It's going to take place, telling China that recently. China and Russia both actually trying to help people prepare for nuclear war around the borders because they both border North Korea. So they're actually trying to assist with that. And then the biggest part of the news this week, of course, President Donald Trump announcing that the United States will now recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, very important things that we have to understand in what's being said here. For one, there's a waiver that has been signed every 6 months since 1995. It started with President Bill Clinton. Now, all this was based on the Oslo Accords, if you remember, the 1993 signing of the peace treaty between Yitzhak Rabin and, of course, Yasser Arafat. They were the two leaders that were there to represent those two countries. And then the United States, but you also had Russia sent their foreign minister there also. But in the signing of this, every 6 months, this has taken place, a waiver has been signed. And after President Trump recognized that Jerusalem is going to be where we will put our next embassy, he signed another waiver. Now, in signing that waiver, the reason it's being signed, and the UN ambassador Nikki Haley explains it really well, in signing that waiver, the United States can no longer sign the waiver once the embassy is up and running. But until that embassy is in Jerusalem up and running, they will sign a waiver every 6 months because that's what that waiver says. That you have to sign one until the embassy is up and running. So expect to keep hearing about signing waivers, but it's only due to this up and running embassy, which really has nothing to do with what was done this week. President Donald Trump gave one of the best stir-to-action speeches that you could ever see because he got everyone emotional. He got everyone upset. He's got everyone wanting to know, what do you think you're doing? But watch very carefully. Watch what the rest of the quartet has to say. In one article, now, of course, this is our U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and that is the foreign minister for Russia, Sergei Lavrov, the equal position in Russia. Now it says Tillerson hints at a deal to resolve Arab-Israeli conflict in one fell swoop, and Moscow awaits in its wings. It says the U.S. Secretary of State believes he can resolve the decades-old conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors in one single deal, a deal of the century. Moscow is waiting with bated breath to hear the details of the plan according to its top diplomat. Now, very interestingly, a lot of countries are coming out. The EU came out. You will see this where the EU comes out and says, we do not agree with the United States, but we're waiting to see what they say. He got everyone's attention to where President Donald Trump pretty much said, we're going to change something. We're going to do something to get this moving. We're going to pour some gas on this fire because it's almost out. Well, we're going to make a deal. Well, to get a deal made, you have to stir to action everybody else that's involved in this deal. You have to get people engaging you. And what he done was get everyone literally to engage him. Pay close attention to what the deal is they say they want. It hasn't changed from the deal that's brokered in 1993, that two-state solution. Peace between two countries. You have peace. That's what they're looking for. And listen to what they say about if we get this done. He doesn't say if. He speaks about it like they're going to do it. When they get it done, they will have this everlasting peace. But pay close attention because you're going to see things that Nikki Haley, as she sits at the UN, she not only blasts the UN, she blasts other countries. And she clearly says the United States is not a patient people, nor will they be lectured by any other country. And of course, Pope Francis is coming out and saying we need to keep with the status quo of the UN. Well, of course, they run the UN. So keep this in mind. You have Russia standing to the side, watching and waiting. You have Pope Francis saying stick with the guidelines the UN has set forth. And then you have the United States saying, no, we're going to do it this way. And remember, Pastor brought this out years ago, that you have Russia, United States, and the Vatican all vying for a top spot. But do not forget what Henry Kissinger said. The United States has weapons that they have not shown yet, and they're very shortly going to show them. Sometimes they're psychological weapons, and sometimes they're weapons of mass destruction. But of course, everything that's being done, they're going to say peace. And for the house of Yahweh, this should not come as a thief in the night. We should know that our redemption draws near. At this time, if we could please play the news.
Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, Trump has made a move to actually recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The international communities, of course, have responded to that. And, of course, we've got more on North Korea in the news. But first, we're going to start off with Senator Al Franken, who is in the news right now. He is one of the latest senators to resign amidst sexual misconduct allegations. Senator Franken suggests he is a victim of a double standard. In his resignation speech, he stated that he was leaving while a man has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assaults. Well, he sits in the Oval Office, referring, of course, to President Trump. Like President Trump, Franken is accused of groping women before he came into office. Franken isn't the only one in the spotlight. Roy Moore had been disavowed by many Senate Republicans due to those same type of allegations.
Well, later that day, Republicans learned that Arizona Republican Trent Franks intends to step down after 8 terms, although he didn't reveal what his reasoning was for the move. He told reporters when asked why he was stepping down, "I'll let the statement speak for itself." When asked what does the statement say, the senator simply said, "Read it."
Very tight lip. Well, North Korea is edging closer to nuclear war, as the United States and its allies continue with military drills, which the North sees as provocative. Well, take a look at this next video as the tensions of war build between North Korea and the United States. Well, Katan, you can definitely see the situation isn't getting any better. They're still going back and forth just like they have been. That's right.
Well, the U.S. State Department is asking all U.S. diplomats to put off all travels to Jerusalem and the West Bank until later this month. Now, this amid concerns that there may be violence in the region after the statements made by President Trump saying the U.S. recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel for the first time since a Jewish state nearly 70 years ago. Along with his campaign promise to move the U.S. Embassy, President Trump ordered the State Department to start making plans to move the embassy there.
Well, President Trump said in an address concerning the matter, "We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past." Now, the president made this decision going against previous presidents. He also rejected recommendations from his secretaries of state and defense. The president also said this is a long overdue step to advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement.
Well, the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will be leading the effort, but he has yet to formulate a plan. Candidate Trump appealed to the conservative Christian base when he promised the embassy would be moved. Well, he started that move, which is expected to take at least 4 years. Now, a new embassy, when completed, will be a magnificent tribute to peace. The decision made by the president was done at the urging of Vice President Mike Pence, a Christian conservative and staunch supporter of Israel. Now, Pence will travel to the region later in the month.
President Trump said that the U.S. will not dictate the terms of a peace agreement, but will support a two-state solution if that is what the Israelis and Palestinians agree to. With this announcement, senior administrative officials anticipate that the Palestinians will, quote, blow off some steam, end quote, before realizing that the U.S. is central to any durable peace deal. With this move, they say the president is signaling the contours of this deal will get worse, not better, the longer the Palestinians wait.
Well, the global community is mobilizing in response to the president's recent decision. Larry McGee is picking up for us with the details. Larry, what are some of the leaders now saying about President Trump's move to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel?
Security Council members are calling for a UN meeting to talk over President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Sitting in the hot seat concerning the matter, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, shared insight concerning the particulars related to the president's decision with reporters this week. The ambassador stated that the decision has been 22 years in the making, electing to pinpoint congressional approval of the Jerusalem Embassy Act in 1995 as a starting point. The ambassador stated that the move is actually a measure that has political support from both major parties in the U.S. The diplomat commented that with Israel's prime minister being in Jerusalem along with this parliament and Supreme Court, there's really no dispute as to whether the city is in fact the capital, and traditionally the United States has always placed its embassy in the capital. Mrs. Haley says that all of the leading presidential candidates have been for moving the embassy, but the move hasn't been taken up until now due to the belief that the act would hurt the peace process. The diplomat stated that for 22 years, however, we have not seen a peace process, and so the idea is that if we do something different, maybe we will now start to see something move forward. The message that the current administration reportedly wants to send is that it is time, for the sake of Israeli children and Palestinian children, for both sides to come together. It's time for them to negotiate, and the United States is pushing that process. Ambassador Haley says that for 22 years we have seen everything be stale, and the president has finally said, let's get it done. The official perspective is that the peace process is too far down the road to stop negotiations. Another point of interest is the waiver that every president since 1995 has signed to keep the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv for security reasons. The next deadline is scheduled to come up in 6 months, and there are questions as to what the president's move will be. The administration's response is that the language of the waiver states that the embassy site has to be functional at the time that it is declared. So if the embassy is built, the president will not have to sign the waiver. But if it is not, then he will. Amid other controversies, including alleged disagreement with respect to the move by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and others, the ambassador stated that at the end of the day, this is about a president who has had the courage to say we're going to try something different. He's moving the ball on that, and we're seeing Palestinians and Israelis come together to finally talk about a peace process, she says. Let's hope that happens. In answering to the international community of the United Nations concerning the president's recent move, the ambassador's language was clothed in candor and frankness. Here's a recording from the ambassador's speech.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Jewish people are a patient people. The American people are less patient. It's important to be clear about exactly what the president's decision does. The president has announced that the United States recognizes the obvious, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. He has also instructed the State Department to begin the process of relocating the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That is what the president has done. And this is what he has not done. The United States has not taken a position on boundaries or borders. The specific dimensions of sovereignty over Jerusalem are still to be decided by the Israelis and the Palestinians in negotiations. The United States has not advocated changing any of the arrangements at the Temple Mount Harim al-Sharif. The president specifically called for maintaining the status quo at the holy sites. Finally, and critically, the United States is not predetermining final status issues. We remain committed to achieving a lasting peace agreement. We support a two-state solution if agreed to by the parties. Those are the facts of what was said and done this week. To those who have good faith concerns about the future of peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, let me again assure you that the President and this administration remain committed to the peace process. To those who do not act in good faith, to any person, leader, country, or terrorist group that uses this week's decision as a pretext for violence, you are only showing yourselves to be unfit partners of peace. Finally, I will not let this moment pass without a comment about the United Nations itself. Over many years, the United Nations has outrageously been of the world's foremost centers of hostility towards Israel. The UN has done much more damage to the prospects for Middle East peace than to advance them. We will not be a party to that. The United States no longer stands by when Israel is unfairly attacked in the United Nations. And the United States will not be lectured to by countries that lack any credibility when it comes to treating both Israelis and Palestinians fairly. It is no coincidence that the historic peace agreements between Egypt and Israel and between Jordan and Israel were both signed on the White House lawn. If and when there's a historic peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, there's a good likelihood that it too will be signed on the White House lawn. Why is that? If and when there's a historic peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, there's a good likelihood that it too will be signed on the White House lawn. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that?
Not surprising, the response of global leaders has been mixed, with Israeli head Benjamin Netanyahu praising the decision and labeling it as a very significant day, while the leader of Palestine stated that he believes that the move disqualified America from being a negotiator. The move is reportedly being viewed in the Islamic world as a slap in the face, since so many Muslims support the cause of Palestinian statehood. There are reportedly quite a few amongst them who believe that the U.S. is waging a war against Islam, and the suspicion is that the latest move by the president will be seen as evidence of that. Opposition has come from other parties as well, including the King of Jordan, China, and the Pope, who says that he has prayed that wisdom and prudence will prevail. Palestinian protests have also broken out, with certain groups calling for a day of rage, and Hamas has stated that the announcement opens the gates of hell. The conclusion of it all seems to be that while there are various governments of the Euphrates who disagree, they are helpless at the moment to do anything about it. But the belief is that in the future, when America needs cooperation from the oil-rich quarter, moves like this will be remembered and won't help. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, it definitely seems as Ms. Haley is adamant about this peace process and these moves from the president moving forward. So I guess we'll see how all this plays out in the next few months. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, made it clear that the U.S. is not in line with their plans of a two-state solution. He said, the two-state solution, he said, there is no plan B. It is only by realizing the vision of two states living side by side in peace, security, and mutual recognition with Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and Palestine, and all final status issues resolved permanently through negotiations, the legitimate aspirations of both peoples will be achieved.
The Secretary General said he would do everything in his power to support both the Israeli and Palestinian leaders. He encouraged the return of negotiations to achieve an lasting peace for both peoples.
Interesting. Well, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was informed of President Donald Trump's plan to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem. He warned President Trump that any such move would have dangerous consequences. International law states Jerusalem is occupied by Israel and must be given back to Palestinians.
The High Representative of the European Union, Federica Mogherini, expressed concern, saying the European Union supports the resumption of a meaningful peace process towards a two-state solution. We believe that any action that would undermine this process must absolutely be avoided. A way must be found through negotiations to resolve the status of Jerusalem as the future capital of both states, so the aspirations of both parties can be fulfilled.
The French President, the Arab League, Secretary General, and the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. have all warned the detrimental impact this move will have on the peace process and tensions in the region. The Turkish president has also cautioned that recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital is a red line for Muslim countries.
President Erdogan said Jerusalem, Mr. Trump, is a red line for Muslims. While the wounds of the Palestinian people continue to bleed, while there are daily violations of rights and oppression, making a decision like this to support Israel is not just a violation of international law, it is also a heavy blow to human conscience.
The Turkish president vowed to fight this to the end, even if it would mean cutting ties with Israel. The Jordanians were also displeased as Jordan's King Abdullah strongly criticized any such move by the U.S. for its dangerous repercussions on security and stability in the region. The chief representative in Washington for the PLO viewed the U.S.'s decision as a decision with catastrophic consequences.
Well, Pope Francis had to chime in as well, saying, "My thoughts go out to Jerusalem in this respect. I cannot hide my deep concern about the situation that has developed in the last days. And in the meantime, I make an urgent appeal to everyone to respect the status quo of the city in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the United Nations."
Well, Russia, the UK, China, Germany, and Syria have all criticized the U.S. president for his plan on Jerusalem.
Well, we close today with a statement from Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, along with one of his colleagues, on their feelings towards President Trump's announcement.
With thanks to Olof from Sweden for the initiative, Christoph from Germany and I from the UK will now read the text in English, just as Francois from France and Sebastiano from Italy have done the French text. So this is the agreed English text of the European statement. We disagree with the US decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to begin preparation to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It is not in line with Security Council resolutions and is unhelpful in terms of prospects for peace in the region. The status of Jerusalem must be determined through negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, leading to a final status agreement. It is a constant position of EU members that within this framework, Jerusalem should ultimately be the capital of both Israeli and Palestinian states. Until then, we recognize no sovereignty over Jerusalem. In line with international law and relevant Security Council resolutions, notably resolutions 476, 478 and 2334, we consider East Jerusalem as part of the occupied Palestinian territories. An agreement on the borders of the two states should be based on the 4th of June 1967 lines with equivalent land swaps, as may be agreed between the parties. The EU will not recognise any changes to the pre-1967 borders. The EU will not recognise any changes to the pre-1967 borders, including with regard to Jerusalem, other than those agreed by the parties.
Thank you. Having been invited by my European colleagues to join this statement, I conclude the English version. Given the volatile situation on the ground, we call on all parties and all regional stakeholders to work together to maintain calm. We all share a willingness to put an end to the conflict. We note the commitment made by President Trump to support a two-state solution if agreed by both sides, and his clear acknowledgement that the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem must be subject to negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We stand ready to contribute to all credible efforts to restart the peace process. We stand ready to contribute to all credible efforts to restart the peace process on the basis of internationally agreed principles and parameters, leading to a two-state solution. We encourage the U.S. administration to now bring forward detailed proposals for an Israeli-Palestinian settlement. We encourage the U.S. administration to now bring forward detailed proposals for an Israeli-Palestinian settlement. We encourage the U.S. administration to now bring forward detailed proposals for an Israeli-Palestinian settlement.
Katan, we see Christoph Huskin there ending the statement by saying now that The U.S. has made this proposal. Let's see what the details are. Go ahead and bring them forth, and let's see how it's going to work out with the Israelis and the Palestinians. So quite a bit of controversy in the international community. Everybody, it seems like, except the U.S. and President Donald Trump, is against just Jerusalem only, the capital of Israel. They want the two-state solution. And, of course, we know that Yahshua Hawkins has written quite a bit about this peace process.
That's right. In fact, in his books, The Mark of the Beast, he has 2 volumes on that. The first one was written in the late 70s. He actually showed through Bible prophecy that these very things would be done, that the nations would be divided, and Israel, they would actually enter into this peace plan that took place in September of 1993. It was signed on the White House lawn. President Clinton was in office at that time, and then it went into effect in October 13 of 1993, and he's wrote a lot about that in The Mark of the Beast, Birth of the Nuclear Baby, and also another pamphlet that he has called The Peaceful Solution to Rebuilding the Next Temple. Has a lot of information about the very things that we're seeing take place at this time right now.
And for all our viewers, you can obtain those writings that Kohan just mentioned by contacting the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free prophetic word and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can also call them at 1-800-613-9494, or visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can also email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And of course, as we mentioned in the past, don't forget the free study resources to the Holy Scriptures, the Yisrael Says and the Ask Yisrael program. When you can find that by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another inspired message from Yahshua Hawkins as he ties in today's news into Bible prophecy. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Kohan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.
At this time, if everyone would please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the Great Kohan Yisrael, Abel Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. Wow. We got a great crowd. Yahweh. Let them understand. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Things are really looking great in the world. The war is coming. As Henry Kissinger says, if you can't hear the drum beats now, you've got to be deaf. Oh boy, wonderful, wonderful. Just a word to the teachers. All teachers in the House of Yahweh, you've been trained to do this. Yahweh has seen to it that you're trained fully. Don't grow lax. Don't go back in a hole like Yonah did. Do your job. Do what Yahweh trains you to do. You're going to be very glad you did very soon. Word to the wise. You're seeing from the news here that was shown in action, so to speak, because this is live. We see the nations lining up. We see the war is coming. The nuclear war is very close. The prophecies, there's still a lot of prophecies here to be fulfilled that eventually we'll cover them all. You have the God worshippers that are preparing for war. President Trump is doing what he's been programmed to do. The King of the North. I hope you're catching all of this now, because if you don't, you won't understand the rest of it that will come after this now. What is planned? There's a trumpet of God, trumpet of the gods, the trumpet of God, the tree of righteousness and evil, evil like the gods. This is all shown in chapter 6 of Revelations. If you just look at the moves now that the nations have made and are making, Henry Kissinger actually sees it. I don't know if he knows anything about the prophecy or not. Probably doesn't. And then you have the trump of Yahweh at the same time, in the same time period. It was just handed to me. If I didn't misplace it, here it is. In 1973, the name of Yahweh, the name of Yahweh's work, the House of Yahweh, was revealed by the House of Yahweh. That is 1973. Now, this will be brought out in detail later. One of the women will probably be bringing this next Sabbath. Now that's 1973. 1974, you had the agreement between President Nixon and the Saudi Arabian king accepting the petrodollar. Now, much more will be brought on this petrodollar very, very soon, and we'll because you've got to acquaint yourself with what's going on here, and the oil that is in, they're saying don't hurt. The oil that they've taken, well, not completely, but there's 7 nations that they have planned to take. Iran is going to be the one that brings the great wars to action and the expansion. If you remember the wars in the Middle East, I know I brought this out years ago, and how Israel is going to be, her borders are going to be expanded. Well, that's what you're going to see next with these wars. The dates, like today, almost everything is meaningful now, and I don't want to cover this myself. It's probably going to be covered next week by one of the women. But the date today, if you want to be working on that, and the numbers that go with it, it's really powerful. What Yahweh shows in these numbers and the lessons, the information that is brought from Yahweh's house. The great gathering for the house, this greatest abundance of people will not come until the wars that the gods, which the gods think they're convincing the people that they're going to have peace if these wars will take place. Yahweh shows that the earth will be uninhabitable when these wars take place. Now that's what the prophecies show. For about 1,000 years, in fact. We'll get to all of that too, because all of that is shown in prophecy. We have a tremendous audience now on Facebook, so many so I need to send you a special message from what I'm told here. If you would refrain from your comments until after the show, this would be better and the show won't be interrupted for someone else to listen to, just write your questions down or your comments down, and then send them into Facebook. We'll answer them. We are answering program is expanding all the time, so we're getting to you faster and faster on these questions, and we can answer any question. It don't make any difference what it is. The House of Yahweh can answer your questions if it's scriptural. Praise Yahweh. This week, Yisrael Hawkins says, if you, everyone out there that's got newspapers, check with your news media if these articles are not getting in your paper, and tell them you want these articles in your newspaper. Now, this week, Yisrael Hawkins says the Messiah's actual message of peace on earth is a far cry from what is widely known in latest post. That's up to about 87 million in one, and 72,360 in the other press release. So it's in your area. It's global. There's no reason in the world why you can't get your newspaper in your area to running these articles. This is how Yahweh's work is reaching the people with the warnings of the world and the preparation of the wars that are taking place. The trump of Yahweh, which is the house of Yahweh in these last days, is taking the warning of Yahweh against the gods, against the house of God, saying this is going to bring you total destruction. It won't put you in charge. It won't kill the other side of the people, the other group. It's going to kill all sinners. It's going to burn up all sinners. That's what Malakia, if you have a King James Version, it's Malachi. They took off the name of Yahweh out of his name in the King James Version and all other versions. That's the power of the beast, the house of the gods. That's their power in order to deceive. Take his name out. Take the name Yahweh out and pretend that the Creator was God, that the gods created the earth. Of course, that's all a lie. It was Yahweh, and the prophets say this, and the prophets were persecuted, but every prophet of Yahweh brought forth the laws of Yahweh, with no exceptions. They brought forth Yahweh's laws and his prophecies. I think I've covered enough there. The news, the North Korea says U.S. threats make war unavoidable. Now that's where it's getting down to the nitty-gritty. China urges calm at this time. She won't be able to do that much longer. China and Russia will be forced into this. They'll be forced into this great war that is building at this time, and the world leaders see this. This is one thing I'm really glad of, because before they were keeping it hush-hush, but now it's creeping out bit by bit, and the people, the nations are knowing what is taking place. It says, Trump's speech recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I hope that you remember that. You might even get you a copy of it and study what he says. I want to point out just a few things. He says, today I am delivering, I've judged this course of action to be the best interest of the United States of America and the pursuit of peace. Notice they keep saying they're They're in pursuit of peace. If you remember Daniel 8, it shows you that in the last days, through peace, they will destroy many. And he specifies in that chapter that sin must reach its peak. Sin must reach its peak before this takes place. And then, by peace, the house of the gods will bring these wars to destroy the many. Well, this is what the nations now are seeing and they're fearing. Well, he said, in pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians, this is a long overdue step to advance the peace process. Now, when you see that, know that this was 1993, when a newsman, Peter Jennings, I believe, and a man named Clifford Clark working in the sound room heard his speech and called me. It was so hard to catch that in his news program, you had to listen to it several times, and yet that man heard it, and he called me and told me, and we rejoiced. That was when President Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Rabin, they confirmed this 7-year peace agreement with Rabin. And, of course, it stayed in operation. That was 7 years. It stayed in operation 3.5 years. It has 3.5 years that is not completed, which Matithya, Yahshua Messiah said in Matithya 24, verse 21 and 22, he said those days, that 3.5 years is going to be cut short, or no one would be left alive. Matithya 24, 21 and 22. Well, he says, peace, advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement. A lasting agreement. They agree, but then their agreements don't last long. After they get home and do a little book work, then they change their mind. So he's working towards the peace process, advance the peace process, and a lasting agreement. Israel is a sovereign nation. You can see that he knows what he's up against here in time and in the things that have been brought forth in the past, and that won't go away. This was an agreement that's prophesied to take place, and Yahweh gives their every move. He even told them when it would be shut down. It'll only be in operation 3.5 years. I brought that out in the Mark of the Beast that was written in the 70s before it was ever signed. It's reiterated by the gematria that backs it up 100%. When it backs up prophecy, and it does this over and over, it proves that not only the prophecy, but it proves it's accurate. These numbers are accurate. You can't force them to say something they don't say. It's already said in advance. The gematria, Yahweh said it himself. So, and the proof is in the pudding, they say. It is in this being fulfilled and backing up the prophecies. It's reliable. Only when it's added to, you try to add to it, and it's not reliable. It's like the prophecies itself. You start interpreting prophecy, and you've stepped into a pool of mud. You can't interpret these things. The only way you can get an answer to a prophecy is to study. And then you got to remember, you got to let this go into your subconscious mind, and it takes years to do so. You have to be formed from your mother's womb in order for this to take place. And then you can start putting these scriptures together and say, hey, here, right over here, Isaiah himself explains this, or Yechezkel. That's what you will start seeing after you'll start seeing it right off, quickly, but in a little bit. To understand the whole of the Book of Yahweh, it takes many, many years. Yahweh Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. Well, this sounds great in words, but they're saying, the other side is saying, no, it's already capitalized. This belongs to us. It doesn't belong to Israel. Israel was taken out of this land we took over. It's our capital. Israel can't take this. They're taking it by force. You're taking it illegally. See, this is the can of worms they've opened up here. Acknowledging this is a fact, Trump says, is a necessary condition for achieving peace. By peace, he will destroy many. Remember that. Chapter 8 of Daniel. This is just another move that Yahweh tells you. He forecasts this. It was 70 years ago that the United States, under President Truman, recognized the state of Israel. 70 years ago. 70 years ago that he recognized this. Donald Trump meets with Henry Kissinger, another player in this House of the Gods. This was in 2016 when he met with Henry Kissinger. The move is likely an attempt to strengthen Trump's foreign policy. The rest of that is jibber jabber. Henry Kissinger, if you can't hear the drums of war, you must be deaf. Well, we have a lot of deaf people in the world, of course. Well, here's this speech. The United States is baiting China. Did you get that? They're baiting China, he says, and Russia. And the final nail in the coffin will be Iran, which, we see this in Scripture. If you want to pull up the Israel Says Program, Wars of the Middle East, this was all brought out years ago. Get your answers there. They're there waiting on you. One of the things, praise Yahweh, one of the things that we're getting on the chat program is they're getting answers from the Israel Says Program. Another book, by the way, was just added to that. I don't remember what it was. Soon we'll have them all. The United States is baiting China. They're baiting them, China and Russia. And the final nail in the coffin will be Iran, which is, of course, the main target of Israel. We have allowed China to increase their military strength and Russia to recover from Sovietization, to give them a false sense of bravery. This will create an altogether faster demise for them. If you can see what Kissinger is saying here, a lot of this was done on purpose. Otherwise, they would have to go in with conventional weapons that would only take out certain portions of this population. What they're wanting, what he's saying right here is, they're wanting to destroy the population of Russia and of China. This is back to your depopulation program here that's been being taught and agreed upon by the House of the Gods for years now, many years. Am I stirring up the racket on the... I'll try to avoid that. Wake up. we're like the sharpshooter during the mob to pick up the gun, and when they try, it's bang bang. The coming war will be so severe that only one superpower can win. Now, this is what Malachi Martin brought out in the Keys of This Blood. The United States, it's a three-way contest here that they have decided on. The United States is making moves, has been making many moves all along, in taking over these nations under the guidelines of the Catholic Church or the Vatican. For many years, this has been going on. The other two nations, China and Russia, have been building up nations of defense, weapons of defense for their nations, hoping they can survive, like the people that are digging holes in the ground and putting 3 days' food supply down there. I know it's a laugh. If they knew what the Scripture said and could see it in their mind's eye, they would see the earth like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's what's going to be left of the earth, except for the tiny place that Yahweh protects until this thing is over and He moves us to another earth for 1,000 years. Before we're sent back, it'll take 1,000 years for the earth to clean itself. Try putting something on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and you'll know what I mean by 1,000 years. Yes, you can be alive at that time. When that 1,000 years is finished, you can come back with me to the earth, and we'll resurrect all the dead who have ever died. We will give them 100 years of judgment. A judgment period of 100 years. Those who choose Satan then will die with Satan. Those who choose the house of the gods will die with the gods in their own war. Yeah, she'll be able to do it again. She'll probably say the gods resurrected them. Don't pay attention to Yahweh. These gods resurrected you. Surely you won't die again. Oh, it's silly, but that's mankind. But a few. Now remember Yeshua's words. A few will follow the straight and narrow gate. A few of you will be like who? Be like Yahshua. I must be about my Father's business. No, I want to go home and watch a string or play a movie. That's Satan's way, the house of the gods. Eat, drink, rise up to play. But a few of you who have been trained as teachers will actually go with me back to the earth. Yes, I'm going to be there. Yahweh shows that. This is all going to come from the sons of men. Come back to earth, resurrect the dead, teach them Yahweh's way, and then let them decide, as you are deciding now, whether or not they'll believe without seeing or not. Because that's what's set before you, that's what will be set before them. Okay, the coming war will be so severe that only one superpower can win. And that's us folks, he says. That's us folks, speaking of the United States. I've told you that the United States is prophesied to stay strong clear up to the very end. They're going to stay strong. They're the strongest nation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be. This was set up for the house of Yahweh, so we could teach from here And that's what Yahweh said, and that's what we're doing. We're teaching all nations. How did you think that came about? It couldn't be done in any other nation. Not even the surrounding territories here wouldn't allow it. Their death on it in Canada, it's to the south and west of us, the lands, not the United States. The United States is held by the laws put in order when they wrote the Bill of Rights. Yeah. Okay, the only one superpower. And Malachi Martin says it's a three-way contest. The United States hopes to come out on top. So does the Vatican, and so does Russia. And he said the only one that is likely is Russia, because Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons. And yes, the United States will be protected up until the end, but they're going down also. The United States is prophesied to go down. New York is going to be hit hard, really hard, but the rest of the nations will too. Everyone is going to suffer this, except the ones that Yahweh has already set before the world began. If you look at the way Yahweh designed this earth, if you look the way Yahweh designed this earth, and you study how America was held out, think about that. That was all in Yahweh's plan, and he said before America was discovered, long before Columbus came here, he says, I'm taking this, the house of Yahweh, to a land, a Babylonius, to be land not yet established. That was the United States. How did Zechariah know the United States was sitting over here somewhere? It hadn't even been discovered, and wasn't till 1492. Zechariah was written back 600 years before Yahshua. He says, and that's us folks. This is why the EU, now get this, this is why the EU is in such a hurry to form a complete separate state, a complete superstate, because they know what is coming. And to survive, Europe will have to be one whole conclave state. Europe. Well, the problem is there's going to be nothing left of Europe, nothing left of Europe except what Yahweh has made preparations for to begin with. And that is individuals, not land. They're going to come over to you at that time. Europe will have to be one. They know this, he says. They know that Europe is going to have to be a really strong superpower in order to get this thing back together and take control of it. This is what he's saying. The urgency tells me that they know full well that the big showdown is upon us. And he says, oh, how I have dreamed of this delightful moment. This is Henry Kissinger. Control oil, and you control nations. This is his words. Control food, and you control the people. Revelation 6 says the same thing. It tells you this is about the oil supply that they want to control. And you've heard the news about the petrodollar and the move against it. Well, you know, the strongest nation on earth is the one that has that. Mr. Kissinger then added, if you are an ordinary person, then you can prepare yourself for war by moving to the countryside and building a farm. I wonder where he was referring to. If he knows anything about us or not. That's his words. But you must take guns with you, and as the hordes of starving will be roaming. Also, even though the elite will have their safe havens and specialist shelters, they must be just as careful during the war as the ordinary civilians, because their shelters can be compromised. After posing for a few minutes, he collected his thoughts, and Mr. Kissinger carried on. We told the military that we would have to take over 7 Middle Eastern countries. That was reported to us back a few years ago when a man from here, from Beard, went to Washington and came back with this bit of information that he said he cried when he saw what they were going to do to this country, the United States, in these plans that they're putting together. Well, he said, we told our military that we would have to take over 7 Middle Eastern countries for their resources, and they have nearly completed their job. That is, the military has nearly completed its job. We all know what I think of the military, he says, but I have to say they have obeyed orders superfluously this time. It is just that last stepping stone, Iran, which will really tip the balance. How long can China and Russia stand by and watch America clean up? The great Russian bear, the Chinese sickle, will be roused from their slumber, and this is when Israel will have to fight with all its might and weapons. Yes, Israel is going to be hit hard also, and by many nations, to kill as many Arabs as it can, he said. Hopefully, if all goes well, half of the Middle East will be Israel. That's the plan. Half of the Middle East will be Israel. Are young, their borders will be expanded, but not for long. If you get the wars in the Middle East, you will see that they will be expanded for just a very short time, but this brings even more hatred. The wars will start, and then they will grow worse, and after a third part of man is killed over that fourth part of the earth, they still won't repent. The big one comes right behind it, following it, and that's the one that's got to be cut short. Otherwise, everyone would be wiped out. But that's the last of the super hit first nuclear wars that's going to take place. Hopefully, if all goes well, the Middle East will be Israel. Half of the Middle East will be Israel. Our young have been trained well for the last decade, or so on. Combat console games. Did you know about that? Anyone raise your hand that knows about this? Praise Yahweh. Some do. Combat console games. It was interesting to see the new call for duty, Modern Warfare 3 game, number 3 game, which mirrors exactly what is to come. They're actually showing them what is to come. In the near future, they're doing this. They probably don't realize it altogether, that they're showing them what it is they're going to do. And they're trying to prepare them in their minds, and he says they're prepared well with these games they have. In the near future, with its productive programming, our young in the U.S. and West are prepared because they have been programmed to be good soldiers, cannon fodder, and when they will be ordered to go out into the streets and fight those crazy Chins and Rushkis. They will obey their orders, he said. They've been programmed to do it. This is what's going on in the public schools, brethren. It's been going on for several years. And we get a little of it now and then. They are taught a little now and then. It's in all the public schools. Out of the ashes, he says, we will build a new society. Out of the ashes. Well, if they'd read Malachi 4, remember that? Malachi 4? Yahweh shows that the sinners are going to burn themselves. Now, this is done with nuclear burning, burn like an oven. It will leave them neither root nor branch. Their ashes. Now, this is what they're saying the gods are going to bring them. Yahweh says not so. He says the only ones that's going to survive here are those in the place of safety, those I've picked to come to the place of safety. Those are the ones, that's only ones that's going to survive. Those who will repent and turn to Yahweh. If you'll get that line 2 right there, those who reverence my name. It's a very short chapter, Malachi or Malachi 4. Everyone needs to memorize it. Those who reverence my name are the ones that's going to be left alive when the final burning comes, that 1 hour burning. Out of the ashes, he says, we will build a new society. He actually thinks that's the house of the gods that's going to be doing that. He's getting his scriptures mixed up. None of the houses of the gods are going to be destroyed. The horns of the golden altar, that's where symbolizes all the killing that is taking place. They're going to be chopped off at that time. In the time of the last work, the 7th trumpet, in this time period. In your time period, right now, this is going to take place. Not down the years, not a few hundred years later. It's going to be in this generation. This generation started in 1934. Get that in your mind. That's when knowledge was increased. It started the increase in 1934 with the patent of the computer. Also in 1934, the patent for the nuclear bomb that can darken the sun. Also, the witness was born in 1934. All these things took place together to fulfill this generation's work for Yahweh. That's the house of Yahweh, and the destruction that Yahweh said from the beginning is going to come. Yahweh said this from the beginning. It's going to come. The destruction. But he said he will have a work, a prophesied work only. And that prophesied work, Amos 3, we'll get into that. I better not say next week. Out of the ashes, he said, we will build a new society. There will only be one superpower left. One superpower. Now, the Catholic Church, who's always fighting among itself, against itself, they're still fighting. They're trying to get all the sodomites in office right now. They're getting them all lined up. The move that you see of women coming forth and saying they were molested 30 years ago, one of them the first time in the men's apartment, the second time in my apartment, the next time in the movie theater. You know, try to look at this and be real. The Catholic Church wants every man who likes a woman course, I know the men haven't been trained, in the world, in the house of the gods. They don't know that private property's got to be respected, and it should be. They don't know that women shouldn't go to a man's apartment skimpily dressed. They shouldn't even go there at all. They shouldn't even be talking to the man. Even when I was a child, brother, this is how the world has changed. You didn't talk to a girl unless you were properly introduced by the girl's parents. And that was even in the movies that came out, the first movies. Now, this is how much disrespect has come down to our society. The Catholic Church, I brought you years ago. Seemed like 1,000 years ago that I told you that the Catholic Church has the biggest computer in the world. In Brussels, Belgium, I told you this. It's capable, I said, of keeping records on every single person in the world. Every person who exists in the world. All they got to do is punch in a name if they want to get rid of a man, get him out of office. There's a man named Moore who set the 10 Commandments in the courthouse, or at least close enough where they could be read. His name was Moore. In reading that, I'll show you a picture later, but it said Yahweh. I am Yahweh. And he had the word, I am Yahweh. Now that's 2 strikes against him. This man's in office. He had the 10 Commandments there in stone. The next thing was, he let it be known he was against sodomites. Well, that's the way to tilted the scales. They punched in his name. They've got every complaint they needed. All they needed to do is pay these people to come forward and make a complaint. They're probably Catholics anyway. I mean, Catholics rape babies. They rape women. The armies are full of Catholics who are raping women and men. Come on, wake up. If you're going to dismiss everyone that wants a woman, you're going to dismiss everybody except the sodomites. Take more out of office and put less back in there to take his place. Well, this goes on constantly. Most of it you don't hear of. They just tell them, we want you out of office. If you don't go out peacefully, we're going to expose you. There can be a couple of Catholic cardinals appear in an office in Washington, and they'll say, I have 2 billion people. That's against this law right here. We want it taken off of the books. Now, do you want to do it, or do you want us to replace you? And they have that power, and Malachi Martin brought this out. So did I. In Genesis 49:10, the Sodomites hold the keys. They hold the rod, the lawgiver. They're the lawgivers of the world. They're still the leaders of the kings of the earth. Well, these people, Yahweh shows in Malachi, the 4th chapter, that they are not going to exist. Not for 1,000 years. High alert for U.S. troops in Afghanistan. After Jerusalem move report. There was another one that I wanted to read before I read that one. Here it is. Henry Kissinger. If you can't hear the drum, the beats of the drums of war, you must be deaf. He says the United States is baiting China and Russia. I did read that, right? With Iran. The oil control the oil and control the food. Now, and he says you can control the people. Well, you can see what a fine atmosphere that's going to be when they try to if they did survive and they had this superpower to control the people globally, how long would it last? You know, they want the people to be their servants. But people, they plan things and they maneuver. And of course they build gangs. And in the Catholic Church itself is war and fighting. Well, this one now, high alert for U.S. troops in Afghanistan after Jerusalem move report. They know that this could take place any time now. This is what they're telling you here in these articles. We know that there are certain prophecies that's got to take place. We know that there will be a third part of man killed over that fourth part of the earth, and they still won't repent. But there is a dividing point right there that's shown in Revelations 9, 20 and 21. There's a dividing point. They come up to that point of killing a third part of man in that fourth part of the earth, and that divides it from Malachi, the 4th chapter, and also from Isaiah 24, which says the earth is going to be destroyed and few men left. If you'll take that few to to Matthew 24, take that few to Matthew, the 7th chapter, you'll see the Savior saying there, only a few. He's talking about the righteous, about you. So is Malachi, the 4th chapter. He's talking about those who reverence my name. I brought a series of sermons on reverence, what this means. Back in the days, I think it started in Abelin at the press room, and showing what it actually means to reverence the name of Yahweh. Well, Malachi uses that word and says those who reverence my name are going to be very joyous at that time. They're going to be go out leaping like calves from the stall. Well, he says U.S. troops now in Afghanistan are on a special notice to move alert following the U.S. Jerusalem decision, according to the Military Times. Donald Trump's announcement has been met with anger across the Middle East, stalking fears of U.S. troops being targeted. We're all in a 1-hour notice to move status right now, he says. He says, I'm just reading this. I deeply respect Donald Trump, and in fact, I pray for every president and urge you to do the same thing. That's the Savior's words. Trump's stupid decision, he says, will be the big spark for removing the entity Israel from the body of the Islamic nation, and a legitimate reason to target American forces also. Well, that's his opinion, but that's some of the moves they can make. Trump, Jerusalem recognition, fears of global backlash, declaration of war, Trump's Jerusalem decision, lights Middle East powder keg, God. Now here is Trump. Here is the house of the gods. Trump does not worship Yahweh. Trump worships the gods. Same thing as the Catholic Church. The same thing you see set up in Genesis 3, and the first of mankind turning to God worship. And Yahweh said there, the tree of life is shut off. The tree of life is shut off. Now get this next part, because you're included in this in Genesis 3. The tree of life is shut off. Now all of these churches, all of these religions that's formed, they're all false. Deceived. Yahweh says, 12:9, Revelations 12:9, the whole world is deceived. Yahweh put 2 cherubim. I don't know if Kohan Yahodah got to that part today, but he put 2 cherubim. You can see those 2 right here, a carving of them, and the covenant that mankind continually broke for 6,000 years now. He put those 2 cherubim, it's a little bit mistranslated there, but he said this then, it's the tree of life shut off until these 2 cherubim who will teach to guard and keep. These 2 cherubim, along with Yahshua, in the last days, when I establish my house again. His first house was shut off, remember? The tree of life, shut off from mankind. The tree of eternal life. And won't be preached again until these 2 cherubim, and that's given in Genesis 3, or 4. Genesis 4. What will come about, and he also showed that, is the continual war. Continual war, and that's exactly what we're having. And he shows that continual war will get worse and worse until 1/3 of the people in the east is going to be wiped out, and they still won't repent. Now that's the message that come forth from Genesis. The early part of Genesis, the plan. Get this, boys. The plan. That's Yahweh's plan. You didn't want the tree of life? I'll take it away from you, and I'll show you what develops in the house of the gods. That's the only house left. No more tree of life until these 2 cherubim right here. That's you. That's the house of Yahweh in these last days is taking forth the message from the land that didn't exist in Zechariah's time, but he talked about it. Well, the house of the gods. Now this is what's in action at this time. The trump of the gods, or trumpet of the gods, along with the trumpet of Yahweh. And that's the reason you see the 2 trees again. You see a tree that's promising life, that's giving you destruction, and you see the tree of Yahweh. Isn't that beautiful? You see the tree of life, once again, offered to mankind by 2 cherubim, the last of which works with Yahshua Messiah, the high priest over the house of Yahweh, that wasn't even predicted or prophesied to be established till the last generation. Now that's Yahweh's prophecies, and he says in Amos, or Moshe, I will have no other work except that prophesied. I will bring that work forward. Believe without seeing. You better believe without seeing. I'll bring that work forward, and it will be the one to be the superpower, the super strength that teaches people to practice this way. This will bring you peace. Well, the house of the gods. God is on the side of us Americans. Now that's what President Trump said. God. I don't know if he knows the difference between God and Yahweh. He probably doesn't. But he uses the word God. And God is on the side of us Americans. You know, Yahweh is still in control, and no one can move his work in any way. No one can alter it. And he shows this. They can only go as far as he allows them to go. He set this up thousands of years ago for the house of Yahweh to be established in the chief of the nations. And from there it would take this message, the tree of life, would take this message out to all the world. And that is simple. I mean, that's the plan of Yahweh. And it's brought forth all this time. He's had warnings. Every prophet that he sent it with a warning. One, keep your hands off of my work. That was Yonah's message. Keep your sodomite hands off of my work. But every prophet of Yahweh always showed what they were doing wrong and how they and why, and showed the curses it was going to bring. And is getting one more step closer to the last days when the nuclear bomb would be invented, which is now. We're the only generation that's ever had the nuclear bomb. Israel has been reestablished. They recognize Israel as a nation. Israel. There's a lot of prophecies for Israel. It had to be reestablished. That's what my brother and I were teaching in '62 on the radio. It had to be established. If you can get this, you know, in your mind, you go to Israel, you'll think it's been there forever, but it hasn't. When I went there in 82, it was established to be a state, recognized as a state, and Yahweh took me there in 82, just a few years later. They didn't even have any meat. The people were starving. I was in a fix, and I saw how crazy it is to be without meat. That wonderful falafel is what saved my life in Israel. Very satisfied. Has anyone eaten one of our falafels yet? Here. Praise Yahweh. I didn't get one. You guys got them all. Well, anyway, the trumpet of God. God is on the side of Americans. He is to an extent, and Yahweh is allowing America to stay strong, and he's already said it in advance. That's the way it's going to be, and prophesied it before Trump was ever in office. That was prophesied in 96 AY, that America would be strong up until the very end, and shows even when New York, not the day, not the hour, but it would be hit, and shows where the bomb would hit. And our people know this, and I brought this out in the Mark of the Beast in the 50s. I wrote that in the 50s. No, 70s. I think. I wrote it in the 70s, I do believe. 76, I believe it was. Well, he says, God may guide us to use it, that's the nuclear weapons, in his ways and for his purposes. God may guide us, he said, to do this, to use the nuclear weapons for his purposes. Now, Yahweh doesn't endorse wars in any way. In fact, he told Israel, I'll fight your battles for you. You won't have to do that. But you go out on your own, and this is what's going to take place. And you're going to have to be doing this and this and this and this and this. That was a warning. It wasn't instruction for you to do it. It was a warning. This is what you're going to have to do if you want kings to rule you instead of Yahweh. Keep that in mind. Yahweh can protect you. You don't need guns and ammunition for that. Yahweh can protect you, and he says he will protect you. On August 9th, 1945, on the day the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, President Truman, in a radio address to the American people, concluded that God is on the side of America with regards to the use of nuclear weapons. He may guide us to use nuclear weapons, in his ways and his purpose, he says. We must prepare plans for the future, control of this bomb. I shall ask the Congress. Now, this was in 1945. I was 11 years old at that time, 1945. And he says, we must prepare plans for the future control of this bomb. I shall ask the Congress to cooperate to the end that its production and use be controlled, and that its power be made an overwhelming, that its power be made overwhelming influence towards world peace. And see, they always bring back this world peace, saying the bombs, this destructive power, is going to bring peace. It never has, never will. We thank God, he said, that nuclear weapons, has come to us instead of to our enemies. And we pray that we may guide. Now, see, our enemies now have plenty of this now, the nuclear weapons. And that's what would take place in the Catholic Church if they were in full control. The Catholic Church fights among themselves, and they would develop their nuclear weapons again. And we pray that he may guide us to use it, that is, the nuclear weapons, in his ways and for his purposes. Henry Kissinger and President Truman, Donald Trump, they all speak God, and they think they're talking about Yahweh, the Creator. They don't know the difference in God and Yahweh. The House of Yahweh is the only ones that's brought this out that I know of. It's shown in the very beginning, but the people don't pay attention to that I know of. I've never heard a sermon showing evil like the gods. Never. Not any of the preachers throughout my lifetime has ever brought that out, that Yahweh is not a God. Yahweh shows that he's not a God, even in the King James Version. And in a few places, I think 2 places or 3, they actually use the name, in some of the King James versions, they use the name Jehovah when they started seeing the name, and it was different from the gods. And they used it, you could look up Jehovah in a Strong's Concordance and show you where it's found, but it's in the King James Version. And that was years ago when that took place, and there's scholars that saw the same thing that I've seen, that Yahweh is not a God. He's different than the gods. He's righteous. He's not a God. There was no gods with him, he says in Isaiah, when he formed the earth. Now here they say, this is God, and no gods with him. That didn't quite make sense. And then you find that name Jehovah, and you wonder, well, is that his name? Well, we found out later, of course, that it wasn't his name, that his name was actually Yahweh. But this wasn't found out till my generation. All of this stuff was taking place in my generation. In fact, we're the ones that brought out the Book of Yahweh. And by many, many years of work it took to put that thing together before we felt confident in putting out a first version. Here, the Pentagon quadruples troops troops levels in Syria to stabilize liberated areas. They didn't put them there to take over the land of Syria, of course. This was to keep it peaceful. The U.S. military has increased the number of troops in Syria. Well, that's on the list too, as I've shown in the wars of the Middle East. The U.S. military has increased the number of troops in Syria from 500 to 2,000. The Pentagon said, adding that the conditions-based military presence is justified by the need to stabilize liberated areas. This is the ones that they're saying they've fixed it to where they must be able to move in a minute's notice. 130,000 homeless children, empty food banks predicted this Christmas. They were going to feed them hungry children Christmas Day. If they could get somebody to contribute a few $1 million, and they would take a portion of that and go feed them hungry children on December 25th. Well, of course, if you know about it, the calendar, the first time in history since the Roman calendar was invented, Hosea says we're going to take the name of the gods out of our mouths. Well, that work is going on, and we'll be ready this feast of Passover. You're going to get a half a calendar, a half of a Roman calendar, and when it gets up to Yahweh's New Year, there will be no more. The names of the gods will disappear. The names of the gods will disappear out of the mouth of the people till after the 1,000 years is up. The 1,000 years is up. Then at that time, the people will be resurrected and they will be allowed to be deceived once again. That's when the names of the gods will start being invoked again. I don't think too many will believe that because you'll be there teaching. Yes, that's your job. That's the reason I'm training you. That's the reason I have trained you. That's the reason Yahweh has set up this classroom in the House of Yahweh in these last days. That's what he said, to train you to do work. He didn't train you to sit under a shade tree or to sit in a room and watch television. He trained you for this work. I want you to get your mind on this work. Be a part of it. If you're not a part of it and you want to be teaching now, let us know, because we got a place for you. We got jobs for everyone. Everyone. We could use some of you even on that chat program right now. We've asked you to get your names in. We have relief, they said. We had quite a few, but we don't have enough. So get your names in on that if you think about it. But we got jobs for everyone in the House of Yahweh, and we'll train you on the spot. We have training programs set up everywhere now, in every field. You can train to teach, because soon your work is going to be strictly for teaching, guiding the people into righteous living voluptuously. Yes, you're going to enjoy life to the fullest. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!